I've seen combat zones quieter than that parking lot. I've stood in rooms where lives were decided in seconds, where the wrong call meant a folded flag and a knock on someone's door. But nothing in my training, nothing in my years as a U.S. Army officer prepared me for what I saw that night. My sister soaked to the bone, cradling 2 newborns in the back seat of a car with fogged windows and no heat, while our parents' house, 6 bedrooms, warm lights. Safety sat less than 10 minutes away. They had closed the door on her, on their own blood. And when I touched one of those babies' foreheads and felt the heat burning through my skin, that's when I started shaking. My name is Captain Rachel Carter. I'm 32 years old, and I was raised to believe that family meant loyalty above everything. My father made sure of that. Retired Army colonel decorated, respected the kind of man who could walk into a room and command silence without raising his voice. My mother built the rest of the Image Church Board charity events, the kind of smile that never slipped in public. Together they didn't just raise a family, they curated one. We were supposed to be perfect. My older sister Emily used to be the center of that perfection. She married young 22 to a man our parents approved of. Stable job, clean background, went to the same church. By the time she was 30, she had given them twin granddaughters and a life that looked from the outside like everything they had ever wanted. But perfection is fragile, and sometimes it hides rot. I was at Fort Bragg when my phone rang that night. It was close to midnight. I remember because I had just finished reviewing reports and was halfway through a cold cup of coffee I didn't even want anymore. The storm had been building all evening, wind rattling the windows, rain slamming against the glass in waves. The kind of storm that made you double-check your doors without thinking about it. When I saw Emily's name on my phone, something in my chest tightened. She never called that late. "Rachel," she said, and her voice didn't sound like hers. It sounded thin, frayed, like it had been pulled too tight for too long. Behind her I could hear it. The crying, high-pitched, desperate, layered 2 babies not in sync, and underneath that, the hollow echo of wind. "Aim, what's going on?" There was a pause. I heard her inhale shaky like she was trying to steady herself. They won't let me in." For a second I didn't understand. My mind reached for something logical. Locked door, misunderstanding, anything. "What do you mean they won't let you in?" "Mom and Dad," she said. And then quieter, like saying it made it more real. "They told me to leave. They said, I'm not welcome anymore." The words didn't land all at once. They came in pieces, slow, disjointed, like my brain was rejecting them on impact. "Where are you right now?" "In the car," she whispered. "I parked down the street at first, but I came back. I thought maybe they'd change their minds." Lightning cracked somewhere in the distance, and I heard one of the babies scream louder, sharp, and panicked. "Em, are you inside the car right now with the twins?" "Yes." "How long have you been out there?" "I don't know, a few hours." Something cold slid down my spine. "Are they okay?" They're warm," she said, and there was a tremor in her voice that told me everything she wasn't saying. "I think they're just scared." I didn't believe her, not for a second. "What happened?" I asked. Another pause, longer this time. "I told them," she said finally, "about the divorce." Of course. Of course that was it. Emily had kept it quiet for months. I knew the truth about her husband, how he had cheated on her while she was pregnant, how he had already moved on before the twins were even born. She had tried to make it work longer than anyone should have, longer than I would have, but eventually she chose to leave. To survive. To them that was betrayal. "They said I embarrassed the family." She continued, her voice flattening like she was repeating something she'd heard too many times in the last few hours. "Dad said no daughter of his would walk away from her marriage. Mom said people at church would talk." I closed my eyes, pressing my fingers against my temple. I could hear my father's voice in my head without even trying. The way he said words like honor and discipline like they were laws, not values. "Em," I said more firmly, "now listen to me. I'm coming to get you." "No, Rachel. I'm already grabbing my keys." "It's 3 hours," she said quickly. "The roads are bad. You don't have to." "I do." There was a silence on the line. Then very quietly they called everyone. I froze. "What?" Mom called Aunt Linda, and the others. She told them not to take me in. Emily's voice broke on the last word. She said if anyone helped me, they'd be choosing sides. That was it then. This wasn't anger. This wasn't a bad night. This was a decision. I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. My heart was pounding now hard enough I could feel it in my throat. "Stay where you are," I said. "I'll call you when I'm close." "Rachel." "I've got you," I said, cutting her off before she could say anything else that sounded like apology. "You hear me? I've got you." I hung up before she could argue. The drive felt longer than 3 hours. The storm didn't ease, it got worse. Sheets of rain blurred the road ahead until the world narrowed to the stretch of asphalt directly in front of my headlights. Wind shoved at the car from the side, sudden and violent like it was trying to push me off course. I didn't slow down. My mind kept circling back to the same image, Emily standing at that front door holding 2 carriers soaked begging. And my father saying no. By the time I reached the exit, she had texted me my hands were tight on the steering wheel. My shoulders locked with tension I hadn't realized I was carrying. The Walmart parking lot was mostly empty, the storm driving everyone else indoors. I saw her car before she saw me. Parked under a flickering light, windows fogged from the inside, engine off. I pulled up beside her and killed my headlights. For a second, I just sat there staring. Then I got out and ran. Rain soaked through my jacket in seconds, cold and heavy. I knocked on the window harder than I meant to. Emily's head snapped up from the back seat, her face, pale eyes hollow, in a way that made something in my chest twist. She unlocked the door and I opened it fast, leaning in. The air inside the car was warm, but stale, thick with the scent of damp fabric and something else, something sharp and wrong. The babies were pressed against her chest, wrapped in thin blankets. One of them whimpered weakly, the other barely made a sound. "Rachel," she whispered. I didn't answer. I reached out and touched the nearest baby's forehead. Heat. Not warm, not a little elevated. Burning. My hand jerked back instinctively like I'd touched a hot stove. For a second, I just stared at my own fingers like I didn't trust what I'd felt. Then I looked at her. "How long have they been like this?" I thought it was just the car," she said, her voice shaking now. "I didn't have a thermometer and—" "They have a fever," I said, my voice low, controlled in a way that only happened when I was one step away from losing it. A high one. "I didn't know what to do," she said. "The ER, I don't have." "Stop." I leaned in closer, already reaching for the carriers. "We're going, right now." Lightning flashed again, illuminating the parking lot in stark white. For a split second, everything looked frozen, the rain, the cars, my sister's face. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. This wasn't just a family conflict. This was abandonment. And I wasn't just here to pick them up anymore. I was here to make sure no one ever got to pretend this didn't happen. I helped her move the babies into my car, ignoring the rain soaking through everything, ignoring the way my hands trembled just slightly when I fastened the straps. Emily kept apologizing under her breath, the words spilling out like she couldn't stop them. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to drag you into this, You didn't drag me into anything," I said, sharper than I intended, then softer. "You called your sister. That's what you're supposed to do." She nodded, but her eyes didn't quite believe it yet. As I slammed the car door and got behind the wheel, I glanced once in the direction of our parents' house, somewhere out there, warm, lit, untouched by the storm. I wondered if they were sleeping, if they had convinced themselves they were right, if they thought this would disappear by morning. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. They had no idea what was coming. The emergency room lights were too bright, too clean, everything sterile in a way that made the chaos we had just come from feel unreal. Nurses moved quickly, efficiently, the kind of quiet urgency I recognized from field hospitals. No panic, just action. They took the twins from us almost immediately. "High fever," I said, already shifting into a tone I used on base, clear, concise, controlled. Prolonged exposure to cold, dehydration likely. The nurse nodded once, already moving. "We'll take it from here." Emily's hands hovered in the air after they carried the babies through the swinging doors, like she didn't know what to do without their weight in her arms. Then they slowly dropped to her sides. "They're going to be okay, right?" she asked. It wasn't really a question for me. It was a plea. They're in the right place, I said. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was the closest thing to one I could give. We sat in the waiting area after that. The storm still raged outside. I could hear it faintly against the windows, but in here time moved differently, slower, heavier. Emily leaned forward, elbows on her knees, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Her hair was still damp strands clinging to her face. She looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, just diminished. Like something had been taken out of her. I should have tried harder, she said suddenly. I turned my head. What? With Mark, she said. Maybe if I'd just... Number. The word came out sharper than I intended, cutting through the air between us. She flinched slightly. You don't get to rewrite this into something that was your fault, I said, my voice lower now but no less firm. He cheated on you, repeatedly, while you were pregnant. She stared at the floor. Dad said, I don't care what Dad said. The silence that followed was thick, uncomfortable. For most of my life, saying something like that would have been unthinkable. Our father's words carried weight, authority, finality. But not tonight. Emily swallowed. He said I should have kept my marriage together, that a good wife doesn't give up. I let out a slow breath, forcing my shoulders to relax. And what does a good husband do? She didn't answer. Look at me, I said gently. It took a second, but she did. Her eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion. You didn't fail, I said. You survived. Something in her expression cracked then, just a little, but it was enough. Before she could respond, my phone buzzed. I already knew who it was. Dad. I stared at the screen for a second, watching his name pulse there like a warning. Then I answered. Where are you? He asked. No greeting, no concern, just the question. At the hospital, I said. A pause. Not long, just enough to register. Why? I felt something cold settle in my chest. The twins have a fever, high, dehydrated. Another pause, longer this time. Then flatly, that's not your concern. For a second I thought I'd misheard him. Excuse me. You heard me, he said. His voice hadn't changed, still calm, still controlled. Your sister made her decision. She's dealing with the consequences. I looked over at Emily. She was staring at me now, her breath held as if she could hear every word even without the phone on speaker. They're infants, I said, my grip tightening on the phone. They didn't make any decisions. That doesn't change the situation. I closed my eyes for a brief second, pressing the heel of my hand against my forehead. This was familiar territory. Not the situation, but the tone. The rigid, unyielding logic he applied to everything. Dad, I said, forcing my voice to stay, even she showed up at your door in a storm, with 2 newborns. And she was told clearly what the conditions were for returning. Conditions. The word hit harder than anything else he'd said. She can come back, he continued, when she's ready to fix the situation she created. My jaw tightened. You mean go back to a man who cheated on her? I mean honor her vows. The line went quiet for a second, like even the air between us didn't know how to respond to that. Then another voice came through. My mother. Rachel, she said softer but no less calculated. We're trying to protect this family. By locking your daughter out in a storm, I asked. You don't understand the bigger picture. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. The bigger picture doesn't include 2 sick babies, I said. They're not your responsibility, she replied. They're my nieces. They are the result of a broken home, she snapped, the softness gone now, and that reflects on all of us. There it was. Not concern. Not regret. Reputation. I turned slightly away from Emily, lowering my voice. Do you hear yourself right now? What I hear my father cut in again is that you're making an emotional decision instead of a rational one. I let out a slow breath, then explained the rational part to me. You have a career, Rachel, he said. A future. Don't jeopardize it by getting involved in something that doesn't concern you. I almost missed it, the shift. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. This was about me. Are you threatening me? I asked quietly. Another pause. No, he said. I'm reminding you of reality. I felt my stomach tighten. You're stationed under people I know, he continued. Your name still carries weight because of mine. Don't forget that. There it was. Not a direct threat, but close enough. Before I could respond, another voice joined the call. Michael. My older brother. Rachel, he said smoothly, like we were discussing something over dinner instead of this. Let's not make this messy. I didn't answer. I've already spoken to a few people, he went on, Child Protective Services included. If Emily insists on being unstable, unemployed, homeless, it raises questions. A cold wave of anger moved through me. You wouldn't. Try me, he said just as calmly. Courts look at stability, income, environment. I have a clean record. She doesn't. She left an abusive situation. She left a marriage he corrected. That's how it will be presented. I could hear Emily's breathing now, uneven, like she was trying not to cry. You're talking about taking her kids, I said. I'm talking about ensuring they're raised in a proper environment, he replied. If she can't provide that, someone has to. The implication hung there. Someone like him. Something inside me snapped into place, not explosive, not loud, just final. Let me make sure I understand this, I said slowly. You're threatening to use CPS to take her children because she left a cheating husband. I'm outlining possibilities, he said. That's extortion. That's reality. Silence. Then my father again. You have 48 hours, Rachel. I didn't respond. Decide where your loyalty lies, he continued. Your family or this situation. My fingers tightened around the phone. Emily's head was down now, her shoulders shaking. Emily is my family, I said. Not anymore, he replied. The line went dead. I sat there for a second, staring at the blank screen. The sounds of the hospital came rushing back in distant voices, footsteps, the low hum of machines. Emily didn't look up. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to drag you into this. I exhaled slowly, then leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees the way she had earlier. You didn't drag me anywhere, I said. They did. She shook her head. You could lose everything, Rachel. Your career, I've followed orders my entire life, I said quietly. She went still. But not this one. I straightened, pulling out my phone again. My thumb hovered over my contacts for a second before I scrolled down and stopped on a name I hadn't called in years. Jessica Martinez. Civilian attorney, former JAG. The kind of person you called when things crossed from personal into legal. Emily looked up as I hit dial. What are you doing? I met her eyes. Building a case. Jessica picked up on the second ring. Rachel Carter, she said, her voice sharp alert. No small talk, no hesitation. It's been a while. What kind of trouble are you in? Not me, I said, my sister. There was a pause on the line, brief but loaded. Tell me everything. I stepped into a quieter corner of the hospital hallway, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead filling the silence as I started from the beginning. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't need to. I laid it out the way I would in a briefing fact sequence timeline. Parents, storm, locked door, newborn twins, no shelter, fever, threats. When I finished, Jessica didn't speak right away. I could practically hear her thinking, assembling the pieces. Do you have proof? She asked finally. Yes. What kind? Phone calls, I said. I recorded the last one. Good, keep doing that. There's more, I added. A neighbor saw what happened. Security cameras on the street. Even better, she said. You're building a pattern. I leaned against the wall, crossing one ankle over the other, grounding myself in something physical. They're threatening to call CPS. Say Emily's unstable. That's not just a threat, Jessica said. That's coercion, potentially criminal depending on how far they push it. They'll push it. I don't doubt that. I closed my eyes for a second. Can we stop them? A beat. Better, she said. We can protect her, and if they cross the line, we can bury them. Her words weren't emotional. They were precise, measured, like mine would have been in a different context. What do you need from me? I asked. Everything, she replied. Recordings, messages, anything that shows intent. I also want documentation of the twins' condition when you found them. Hospital records, timestamps, and Rachel. Yeah. Don't warn them, let them keep talking. I nodded even though she couldn't see me, understood. We ended the call with a plan already forming, not fully shaped yet, but solid enough to stand on. When I walked back into the waiting area, Emily looked up immediately. There was something in her eyes now, hope maybe, but cautious. Like she didn't trust it yet. What did she say? She asked. We're not reacting anymore, I said. We're documenting. She blinked. What does that mean? It means everything they say, everything they do from this point on. We keep it. And then, I held her gaze. Then we use it. The doctor came out about 20 minutes later. They're stable, he said, and I felt my shoulders drop a fraction for the first time since we'd arrived. High fever, dehydration, but we caught it in time. We're keeping them overnight for observation. Emily exhaled a sound that was almost a sob but didn't quite make it that far. She nodded repeatedly like she needed the confirmation more than once. Can we see them? She asked. In a few minutes. As he walked away, she leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. I watched her for a moment, then pulled my phone out again. There were already messages waiting. Mom, we expect you home tomorrow. Dad, don't make this worse. Michael, think carefully before you align yourself with instability. I stared at the screen, reading them once, then again. Each message was crafted, controlled, deliberate, carrying just enough weight to remind me what they thought they still held over me. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my recorder app. By the time we got to my apartment the next morning, the storm had passed. Everything looked normal again, streets drying, people moving on with their day like nothing had happened. Emily stood in the doorway for a second before stepping inside the twins secured in their carriers, both sleeping now finally quiet, their small chests rising and falling in steady rhythm. I don't want to cause you problems, she said softly. You're not, I replied, taking one of the carriers from her. You're staying here. Rachel. That's not a suggestion. She hesitated, then nodded, too tired to argue. I set the carrier down carefully in the living room, adjusting the blanket just slightly. The baby stirred but didn't wake. For a moment, everything felt still. Then my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I answered. Captain Carter, a man's voice said. This is Officer Daniels. I live on your parents' street. My grip tightened slightly. Yes. I heard what happened last night, he said. Saw some of it on my security feed. Your sister at the door. The storm. I stayed quiet. I thought you might want a copy, he added, just in case. My eyes flicked toward Emily. She was standing near the kitchen now, watching me, her expression unreadable. Yes, I said, I would. I'll send it over. When the call ended, I lowered the phone slowly. What was that? Emily asked. Evidence, I said. Jessica arrived that afternoon. She walked in with a leather folder under her arm and the same focused energy I remembered from years ago, back when she'd been one of the sharpest legal minds in JAG before transitioning to civilian law. She didn't waste time. Show me. I set my laptop on the table and started pulling everything up. The recordings, the messages, the timeline, then the video. We watched it in silence. The angle was clear, front of the house, timestamp glowing in the corner. Emily on the porch soaked, holding both carriers. My father opening the door, my mother behind him. Even without perfect audio, the body language said enough. Emily pleading. My father stepping forward. A hand pushing. The door closing. Jessica leaned back slightly when it ended, her expression tightening. That's abandonment, she said. With infants involved, that's serious. Emily looked down, her hands clasped together again. I didn't want it to go this far. Jessica's gaze softened slightly, but her voice stayed firm. It already has. She turned back to me. We can file for emergency guardianship. You have standing as their aunt, especially with this footage and the hospital records. I nodded. Do it. And Rachel, she added, this isn't just defense anymore. This is leverage. I understood exactly what she meant. They wanted control, I said. Jessica gave a small knowing nod. Now they're about to lose it. The next piece came faster than I expected. Michael. Not a call this time. An email. Subject line, let's resolve this privately. I opened it, already recording. His tone was different, less overt, more calculated. Rachel. This situation is escalating unnecessarily. We all want what's best for the children. Public exposure will only damage everyone involved, including Emily. Let's handle this discreetly. I read it once, then forwarded it to Jessica. Within seconds, my phone rang. He's nervous, she said. Good. He should be. That email alone shows intent to control the narrative. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. He thinks he can manage this. They always do, she replied, until they can't. I let the silence stretch for a moment. Then I said, there's a family event this weekend. What kind? Dad's retirement gala. Big one. Military, civilian contacts, church people, everyone who matters to them. Jessica didn't say anything right away. Then slowly public enough. I felt something settle into place. They want me there, I said, alone. Of course they do. They want a statement, I continued. Loyalty, control. Jessica's voice dropped slightly sharper now. Then give them one. I looked at the screen again at the frozen frame of my sister on that porch, rain pouring down around her. They've been controlling the story their whole lives, I said quietly. And now, Jessica asked. I closed the laptop. Now we tell the truth. The ballroom was exactly what my father would have wanted. Polished marble floors. Chandeliers casting warm light over carefully arranged tables. A raised stage with a projection screen already cycling through curated photos, decades of controlled memories, each one reinforcing the same narrative discipline, honor, success. The Carter family. Perfect. I stood just inside the entrance for a moment, taking it all in. Uniforms mixed with tailored suits. Familiar faces from military circles, local officials, church leaders. People who respected my father. Trusted him. People who had no idea. Captain Carter. I turned at the voice. Colonel Hayes, one of my father's longtime colleagues, approached with a polite smile. Good to see you, Rachel, he said. Your father mentioned you might not make it. I wouldn't miss it, I replied. Not for anything. He nodded, satisfied, then moved on. Conversations resumed around me, the low hum of polite society. Glasses clinked. Laughter measured appropriate floated through the room. I spotted my mother first. She moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her smile perfectly calibrated for every interaction. When she saw me, her expression brightened, just a fraction more, just enough to signal approval. Rachel, she said, stepping in for a brief embrace, you came alone. There was a question in it, a test. Yes. Good, she replied softly, her hand lingering on my arm. We'll talk later. Of course we would. My father stood near the stage speaking with a small group of men in uniform. Even in retirement, he carried himself like he was still in command. Shoulders back, chin level, every movement deliberate. When his eyes landed on me, he gave a single nod. Acknowledgement. Approval. He thought I had chosen. Michael was at the bar. He lifted his glass slightly when he saw me, a faint smile on his face, the kind that never quite reached his eyes. Smart move, he said when I approached, showing up. I thought so, I replied. His gaze searched mine for a second, looking for something, hesitation maybe. Doubt. He didn't find it. Mom's been telling everyone you have an announcement, he said lightly. Something about your future. I do, I said. He smiled wider. Good, keep it positive, tonight matters. I held his gaze for a beat longer than necessary. It will. The program began 20 minutes later. My father stepped onto the stage, the room quieting almost immediately. He didn't need to ask for attention. He commanded it. Thank you all for being here. He began, his voice steady, carrying easily across the room. Tonight isn't just about my retirement. It's about family, about the values that guide us, discipline, loyalty, integrity. I felt my jaw tighten slightly. Loyalty. He continued, weaving through anecdotes from his career moments designed to reinforce the image he had spent a lifetime building. The audience responded exactly as expected, smiles, nods, occasional laughter. Then he shifted. And speaking of family, he said, glancing in my direction, my daughter Rachel is here tonight. Captain Carter, she's made us all proud. A ripple of applause moved through the room. I stepped forward, controlled, composed. And my mother added, joining him on stage, she has something she'd like to share. Of course she did. 30 pairs of eyes turned toward me, expectant, curious. They thought they knew what was coming. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Thank you, I said, my voice calm, steady, the same tone I used when briefing officers twice my rank. Before I share my news, I'd like to talk about something my father just mentioned. I paused, letting the silence settle. Family values. My mother's smile flickered, just slightly. I turned toward the screen behind us. We all have our own definitions, I continued. But I believe values aren't what we say in rooms like this. I tapped my phone. They're what we do when no one is supposed to be watching. The screen shifted. For a split second, it went black. Then the image appeared. Rain. Heavy, relentless, the timestamp glowing in the corner. October 15th, 11:47 p.m. A murmur moved through the crowd. "That's our street," someone said quietly. The video continued. Emily stepped into frame. Soaked, struggling to hold both carriers steady, her hair plastered to her face, clothes clinging to her like they were part of the storm. The door opened. My father. My mother behind him. The room didn't react right away. It took a second for recognition to settle in, for context to catch up. Then, "Turn that off," my father said, his voice cutting through the air sharp for the first time that night. I didn't move. On the screen, Emily leaned forward, speaking her words muffled by the storm, but her desperation unmistakable. My father stepped forward. His hand reached out. Pushed. A collective inhale rippled through the room as Emily stumbled backward, nearly losing her grip on one of the carriers. The baby's cry cut through the speakers, thin and piercing. My mother's voice, faint but audible, followed. "You made your choice." The door slammed. The sound echoed in the ballroom like a gunshot. No one spoke. The video continued for a few seconds longer, Emily standing there shaking, trying to shield the babies from the rain before I cut it. Silence. Complete, absolute. I turned back to the audience. "That was my sister," I said, 6 hours after giving birth to twins. A woman near the front raised a hand to her mouth. "They had fevers over 103 degrees when I found them," I continued, "in a parking lot, alone." My mother stepped forward. "Rachel, this is not—" I held up a hand. "Please," I said, "let's not interrupt the presentation." A few heads turned toward her. I tapped my phone again. "This next part," I said, "is a conversation from the following morning." The audio filled the room. My father's voice, clear, controlled. "You have 48 hours to decide where your loyalty lies." Then Michael, "If you make this messy, I'll make sure those twins end up in proper homes." A sharp gasp came from somewhere behind me. Michael's face had gone pale. "That's not he started." The recording continued. "Help her and you lose everything." I stopped it there. The silence that followed was heavier than before. It wasn't confusion anymore. It was understanding. Colonel Hayes stepped forward slightly, his expression hard. "Is this accurate?" I met his eyes, unedited. He looked at my father. My father didn't respond. He couldn't. I let the moment stretch just long enough. Then I spoke again. "I've filed for emergency guardianship," I said, "based on documented abandonment and threats of custodial interference." Michael took a step toward me. "You don't know what you're doing." I held his gaze. "I know exactly what I'm doing." He stopped. Around us, the room was shifting. People stepping back, conversations starting in low, urgent tones, lines being drawn quietly but decisively. "This was a private matter," my mother said, her voice trembling now. "You had no right to." "You made it public," I replied, "the moment you called everyone and told them not to help her." A man in a dark suit, one of my father's civilian contacts, shook his head slowly. "Those were infants," he said, "in a storm. No one defended them. Not one person." My father finally spoke, his voice lower than I had ever heard it. "You've destroyed this family." I took a breath, steadying myself. "No," I said, "you did that the night you closed the door." The words hung in the air. Unavoidable. Final. Around us, people were already leaving, quietly, deliberately. The room that had once reflected their control now reflected something else entirely. Truth. And for the first time since this started, they had no control over it. The silence didn't break all at once. It fractured. A chair scraping, glass set down too hard, a whisper that carried farther than intended. Then movement measured at first, then unmistakable. People began to step away from my parents like distance itself could redraw what they had just witnessed. Colonel Hayes didn't raise his voice, but he didn't need to. "Robert," he said to my father, using his first name for the first time I'd ever heard in public, "will need to speak. Now." My father didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on me, fixed and unblinking, as if refusing to acknowledge anything else would make it less real. My mother tried to recover. I watched it happen, the instinct to smooth, to redirect. "There's context here," she said, addressing no one and everyone. Emily was unstable. We were trying to To what a woman near the front cut in, her voice steady with a kind of disbelief that had already turned into judgment. "Protect your reputation." No one answered. Michael made a move toward the stage, stopping short when he realized the path was no longer clear. People weren't just stepping back from my parents. They were creating space between themselves and anything attached to them. "You think you've won something here," he said to me low enough that only I could hear. "You've just made it worse." I met his gaze without blinking. "For who?" He didn't answer. Across the room, someone was already on their phone. Another pair of officers spoke in tight, controlled voices, glancing between the screen and my father. A church elder I recognized from childhood stood off to the side, shaking his head slowly like he couldn't reconcile what he'd seen with what he thought he knew. This was the part my parents never accounted for. Not anger, not defiance. Witnesses. My father finally turned, scanning the room, calculating, assessing the same way he would have evaluated a situation in uniform. But there was nothing to command here. No orders to give that would restore control. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low, meant for me. "I know," I replied. "It's just finally visible." He held my eyes for a beat longer, then looked away. That was the moment I knew. He understood. The fallout started before we even left the building. Colonel Hayes and 2 others walked my father toward a side room, not quite escorting him, but not leaving it optional. My mother tried to follow, then stopped when no one acknowledged her. Michael stood near the bar, phone in hand, speaking in clipped, urgent tones to someone who clearly wasn't giving him the response he wanted. I didn't stay to watch the rest. I had already said everything that mattered. Outside, the air was cooler, cleaner. The storm from the night before was gone, but the ground still held its memory damp heavy. I sat in my car for a moment before starting the engine, letting the quiet settle around me. Then I drove home. Emily was in the living room when I walked in, the twins in their cribs beside the couch. A soft lamp lit the space, warm and steady, the kind of light that made everything feel smaller, safer. She looked up as soon as the door opened. "You're back," she said, her voice careful, like she wasn't sure what she was about to hear. "I'm back." There was a beat. "Then how did it go?" I closed the door behind me, setting my keys down slowly. "They know." Her hands tightened slightly around the blanket in her lap. "What does that mean?" "It means they don't get to control the story anymore." She searched my face, looking for something, relief maybe, or regret. "Are you okay?" she asked. I considered the question. I wasn't shaking anymore. The anger that had carried me through the last 2 days had settled into something quieter, heavier but more stable. "I will be," I said. She nodded, accepting that. We sat in silence for a moment, listening to the soft, even breathing of the twins. One of them stirred, letting out a small, contented sound before settling again. "They're better," Emily said, almost to herself. "The doctor said the fever's gone." I glanced over at them. "Good." Her eyes moved back to me. "Rachel, thank you." I shook my head slightly. "You don't have to." "I do," she said, cutting me off gently. "I know what you risked." I didn't answer right away. Because she was right. I had thought about it, every piece of it, on the drive there in the hospital, even as I stood in that ballroom. Career, reputation, the quiet, invisible network my father had spent decades building. I had weighed all of it. And then I had looked at 2 infants burning with fever in the back of a car. "Some things aren't negotiable," I said finally. She held my gaze for a second, then nodded. The calls started the next morning. Not from my parents, from everyone else. Colonel Hayes called first. His tone was formal, but there was something underneath it, respect maybe, or acknowledgement. "We're reviewing the situation," he said, "but I want you to know what you did took courage." After him came others. People who had been in that room. People who had seen, who had listened, who had drawn their own conclusions. No one said it outright. But the message was clear. My father's influence had limits. And he had just found them. Jessica called around noon. "Guardianship hearing is set," she said. "We have everything we need, the footage, the recordings, the hospital reports, it's solid." "And CPS?" I asked. "Already contacted," she replied. "Not by your brother, by us." I let out a slow breath. Good. "They're not looking at Emily," she added. "They're looking at your parents." I didn't feel satisfaction. Just balance. Jessica said after a moment they're going to try to reach out, apologize, reframe, maybe even offer something to make this go away. I know. What do you want to do? I looked across the room at Emily, who was leaning over one of the cribs, adjusting a blanket with careful, practiced hands. Nothing, I said, not yet. That's a choice, Jessica replied. It's a boundary. She paused, then good. The letter came 3 days later. Delivered, not mailed. Formal, carefully worded. My mother's handwriting at the bottom. We would like to discuss reconciliation. Emily read it twice, then set it down on the table without a word. They don't even say what they did, she said quietly. No, I agreed. We didn't respond. A week later, the court granted temporary guardianship. The judge didn't hesitate. Given the evidence presented, she said, her tone measured but firm, the court finds sufficient cause to place the children under the care of their aunt, Captain Rachel Carter, pending further review. It wasn't a victory speech. It didn't need to be. It was recognition. Life didn't reset overnight. There were still conversations, still consequences unfolding in places we couldn't see, careers shifting, reputations recalibrating. But inside my apartment, something else was taking shape. Not the kind of family I had been raised in. Something quieter, stronger. Emily found work within a month, remote, flexible enough to give her space to rebuild. The twins grew steadier, their cries replaced more often by small, surprising sounds that felt like laughter. We established routines, morning coffee, late-night feedings, the kind of ordinary moments that, in the absence of chaos, felt like something close to peace. Sometimes I would catch myself watching them, Emily moving through the room, the twins reaching for her, and I would think about that night again. The storm, the door, the choice that had been made, and the one I had made after it. I used to believe family was something fixed, defined by blood, by expectation, by roles you didn't question because they were always there. I don't believe that anymore. Family is who shows up when it matters, who stays when it's inconvenient, who protects when it costs something. Everything else is just a story people tell to avoid facing the truth. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and doing what's right, I want to hear from you. Tell me where you're watching from and what you would have done in my place. Stories like this aren't easy, but they matter. And if this one stayed with you, share it with someone who might need it and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. We're building something here together, something honest. Let's keep going.